What would you say to him is one proof that he can look at to confirm that Islam is, the Quran is not a man-made book, and Islam is not a man-made religion, it's indeed from the divine, being an expert in the Quran?
Well, lots can be said. I'd start off by my own journey, just share
Can you hear him?
a couple of things.
Can you hear him,
quickly.
Andrew?
I can hear, yeah.
Okay. Nice talking to you. I think that what I like to do when I meet with audiences, professors of other faiths and intellectuals, anybody, is that I like to invite them to explore the Quran, intellectually and critically. That's an invitation that the Quran gives. It's interesting that people perceive religion as something that you have to be indoctrinated into, and you have to follow it as the dictates are, and you don't have to actually critically ask any questions or think and contemplate. And the Quran is kind of unique in the way that it presents its message, because it's constantly saying, don't you then think? Don't you contemplate? Haven't you asked questions? This is a book for those who seek to have answers. It's not actually asking you to shut your brain off and accept what it's saying. It's actually asking you to contemplate its message. So it stands really unique in that sense. My own, since it offered that invitation to me, I didn't come to the Quran first as someone who believes in it, as wanted to figure this thing out and trying to make sense of it. And many of the things that I struggled with in philosophy when I was a student of philosophy, they started getting unraveled as I was getting deeper and deeper in my study of the Quran. It just started kind of untying a lot of those knots. And it's also remarkable that some of the biggest addictions that people suffer from, every one of them is targeted one after the other in the Quran. Right? Some of the things that plague humanity more, like gambling, for example, alcohol, for example, intoxication, for example. Like each of these things is targeted, and you think it's not just solving a Muslim problem, it's solving a human problem. It's solving a societal problem. It's solving a global problem by targeting each of these specific things. The other thing that that really fascinated me, I ended up writing a book on it, ended up getting taught around the world. Alhamdulillah, it's even being used in one of the Islamic studies courses at Harvard now, is Divine Speech. It's a book I dedicated along with my student to why is this book, why am I believing that it's divine? What's making me think this? And I wrote it for a non-Muslim audience, actually. It's a little bit academic, but the point of it was there are elements to this book and the way that it's structured that if you went to the library or you got on Amazon and bought yourself a translation of the Quran, you started reading it, you think the subject is kind of going all over the place. Right? It's not staying on the same subject. Right? It's saying some profound things, but the organization seems unlike anything I've ever read. And that was one of the things that baffled me at first. Like, why is it organized in this way? And so one of the areas of my study became the organization of the Quran. Why is it organized in this way? Why is God talking in this disarray? And what I discovered was something absolutely breathtaking. That it's got a symmetrical structure. That you'll have a chapter, for example, that's hundreds of verses, like Baqarah is 286 verses. It's an oral tradition, so it wasn't written first, it was recited and pronounced and memorized in that way. Amounts to about 50 pages in Arabic, right? But if you study the subject matter, the 9 subjects that are occurring in this long 50-page discourse are like subject 1 is directly tied to subject 9, and 2 to 8, and 3 to 7, and 4 to 6, and 5 right center in the middle. Like there's an incredible 3-dimensional structure to the way the argument's being presented. Like human beings, we think linear, right? I'm going to make point A, then I'm going to make point B, then I'm going to make point C. That's how I organize my thoughts. And unless you write something down and say, you know what, I'm going to do this, and just for fun, I'm going to do A, B, C, and then go C, B, A. Right? Even doing that in 6 sentences is hard for me as I'm sitting here talking to you, because my brain isn't wired that way. But this millennium and a half old tradition has got multiple surahs and multiple chapters where this kind of a structure is demonstrated over and over again, and other kinds of structures. You're like, this is not possible for a human being to do. Linguistically, it's not possible. I'm a student of linguistics. It's just not possible. These kinds of structures, this kind of organization. That's one of the things I wrote about in the book, and I ended up teaching courses on this stuff. But for just to take a step back level, My invitation to anybody is put your preconceived notions aside. Take what you may have heard about Islam, what you may have thought about it from your own faith tradition's point of view. Put all of that aside. And I wouldn't even invite somebody to read the Quran to accept Islam. Read the Quran neutrally and get a first, an unbiased impression. And I would think it's really difficult to not walk away truly being moved by what you're being exposed to, truly being hit by what you're exposed to. The final thing I'll say is there is a huge tragedy in the world today that even most Muslims aren't as aware of the Quran as they should be, right? So Muslims don't become a really good representation of the contents of the book, right? So even disconnecting yourself from the Muslim bias, I'm just going to read this for myself with no other influences as much as possible. At the end of the day, human beings are going to have some bias or the other, but as much as I can consciously be disconnected from bias and give it a shot and read it, I think that would be my invitation to anybody.
Andrew, any final question, anything you'd like to ask him while he's here? What happened was, because we got delayed with the program, next guest was coming in, so I'm with you. But this is amazing. You can look him up actually online.